the American Association of Independent Music. Thank you so much to the team at IMX for inviting me to present at the conference this year. I'm very excited to walk you through a presentation that will provide a closer look at how recorded music fared in the United States over 2020 and in the first 6 months of this year, 2021. We'll run through some general stats about the US and dive deeper into the major contributing areas to our overall gross revenue from recorded music in 2021. And we'll also touch on some popular trends that emerged over the past year and highlight a few accomplishments specific to the independent sector. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys. All right. Here we go. And let us hop into things. So before we get started, I just want to give a quick shout out to the platforms that I consulted for data and statistics while building this presentation out. MRC Data and Billboard, specifically their mid-year 2021 US report, Music Ally, IFPI, their 2020 Global Music Report that was released in May of this year, and the RIAA, specifically their mid-year 2021 Music Revenue Report. So in order to make sure we have a nice foundation to go off of, let's run through some quick stats from the United States and note that these figures are as of January 1st, 2021. So in 2020, we were a population of roughly 335 million people, and our GDP per capita was just about 64,000. We came in just under 300 million for internet usage and nearly 410 million for mobile subscriptions. I was actually a bit surprised to learn that we have far from the highest internet speed when in comparison to other countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, or even EU regions like France or Switzerland. Our mobile internet speed is also significantly lower than other developed countries. So two areas that the US could really look to improve upon in the coming year ahead. Now let's take a broad look at recorded music revenue, specifically in 2021. And just as a note, in 2020, the US was the overall #1 top market across the globe, and our revenues increased by 7.3%, with an added $564 million to the market. That accounted for roughly 37% of global revenue in the recorded music space last year. Stats that I'm definitely proud to have played a minor contribution to as an American. But moving forward to 2021, recorded music revenues in the US grew 27% in the first half of the year in comparison to 2020, from 5.6 billion to 7.1 billion at retail value. At wholesale value, revenues rose 25% from 3.7 billion in the first half of 2020 to 4.6 billion in the same period of 2021. As I'm sure it's no surprise to anyone watching this, streaming absolutely dominated the US market, contributing an astonishing 84% of revenues from recorded music. This is a trend similar to what we saw in the first half of 2020 as well, so nothing too surprising. And a reminder that this category spans far beyond just traditional DSPs. It includes paid subscription services, ad-supported services, digital and customized radios, and licenses for music on Facebook and digital fitness apps. We can definitely see the effects of COVID-19 continuing to impact the industry, and year-over-year comparisons are significantly affected by retail store closures, the loss of in-person events, and other disruptions from the last year and a half in the supply chain. Physical continued its impressive growth streak by contributing 10% to overall US recorded music revenues, followed by digital downloads at 5% and sync placements in 2%. In 2020, we definitely saw a decrease in sync opportunities, again, largely due to the impact of COVID-19 on television and theatrical productions and advertisements. I'm hoping this number steadily rises over the next 6 months, as sync had previously been on track to grow in rev share in the US. Okay, so next, I will provide us a quick look at the actual dollar amounts these percentages equated to, and then we'll dive deeper into each subject. As I mentioned earlier, streaming contributed to 84% of US rev share in the first half of 2021, with a dollar amount of roughly 5.9 billion. Physical followed after, again at 10% of overall revenue, with a dollar amount of 690 million. Digital downloads came in at 5% contribution with an amount of 319 million. And lastly, Synchronizations provided that final 2% with 191 million in revenue share. Our total revenue for the first half of 2021 came out to 7.1 billion. So let's take a closer look at how streaming continues to dominate in the US market. Revenues from streaming music grew 26% to 5.9 billion in the first half of 2021, as I just mentioned on the last slide. This is largely due to new licensing deals with companies like Facebook and digital fitness apps like Peloton, which have opened up more avenues for music to be featured and played. Paid subscriptions continue to account for the largest share of recorded music revenues in the US, up 26% year over year and totaling 4.6 billion in the first half of 2021. They accounted for nearly 2/3 of our total revenue and just about 78% of streaming revenue in total. This further confirms a multi-year trend of strong growth in this area, extending beyond the challenging and unique circumstances of 2020. We also hit more than 80 million users paying for music streaming subscriptions, the first time in history that we've ever seen numbers this high. And included in this paid subscription tally are subscriptions that are considered limited tier. For example, like Pandora Plus or Amazon Music, essentially any service that has some type of limiting factor like mobility access, catalog availability, interactivity, and so on. Those types of services accounted for 10% of subscription revenues, a small increase versus the numbers we saw in the first half of 2020. These huge increases that we've seen year over year suggest that we would likely still have a ways to go before subscriptions really start to taper off. So continuing on, to be exact on that last figure I just mentioned, the average number of paid subscriptions reached a peak of exactly 82 million, up 13% when compared to the 73 million we saw in 2020. Even though we're seeing this incredible growth in paid subscriptions, the overwhelming majority of music consumers still gravitate towards free tier streaming, with 88% of music listeners in the US utilizing freemium options. I anticipate that we'll continue to see that number slowly dwindle year on year as paid subscriptions become more popular and normalized. Ad-supported on-demand streaming music revenues, examples of platforms like this are YouTube, the ad-supported tier of Spotify or SoundCloud, and so on, rebounded significantly in the first half of 2021, growing 54% to $741 million. This category only grew 3% the prior year as it was significantly impacted by the post-COVID-19 decline in advertising revenue growth across a multitude of media forms. Along with China, though, the US does dominate in ad-supported streaming growth. Last year in 2020, the US accounted for 44.5% of global ad-supported revenues. We can thank the development of free streaming platforms like TikTok, Facebook videos, et cetera, for this growth. Revenue across these platforms more than doubled in 2020 in comparison to 2019. Even though these free tier services account for hundreds of billions of streams to more than 100 million listeners in the US, the category only accounted for 11% of total streams. So while we're seeing this incredible growth rate in streaming subscriptions, the actual growth in streaming subscription revenue appears to be slowing down on a year-by-year basis. We saw an income growth of 14.6% in 2020, which is down from 27.5% in 2019 and 33% in 2018. Something that is definitely important for us as an industry to keep an eye on, given how relatively inexpensive music subscriptions are in comparison to other on-demand platforms. But we've been seeing generally positive trends otherwise in the streaming format, so we are optimistic for growth here at A2IM for the rest of 2021. And lastly, I'll note that digital and customized radio service revenues grew 3% to 585 million in the first half of 2021. So this includes sound exchange distributions for services like SiriusXM and internet home radio stations, as well as payments directly paid out by similar services. So a slightly disheartening stat is that we are seeing digital downloads decrease. Try saying that 5 times fast. In both dollar amount, though, as well as contributions to total revenue. In the first half of 2021, revenues fell 6% by value to 319 million, accounting for 5% of total revenues to the recorded music market. Revenues from digitally download tracks and albums were down 12% and 14% respectively from the same period in the prior year. So likely a trend we will continue to see slowly dwindling, but don't be disheartened because physical is continuing to hold on to its incredible resurgence. As the proud owner of around 1,500 vinyl albums, nothing makes me happier than seeing this trend continue to propel forward. In the first half of 2021, physical sales accounted for 10% of the US's gross revenue from recorded music, the second largest contributing factor after streaming. Revenues from vinyl sales grew 94% to 467 million, though that comparison versus the prior year includes a period where retail and small record stores were significantly impacted by the effects of COVID-19, and Record Store Day 2020 was delayed. We'll talk more about that in just a second on the next slide. Revenues from CDs managed to increase by 44% to contribute 205 million to the overall rev share. But this figure still remains 19% lower than in the first half of 2019. As we can see on the pie chart, CDs only accounted for 30% of physical revenues, while vinyl accounted for more than 2/3 of the physical format. If you ask me, that's just because records are cooler, man, but maybe I'm biased. Something that was pretty cool to learn, though, is that for the first time in over 20 years, vinyl actually surpassed CD revenue in 2020 with an increase of 26.8%. Obviously, as a big collector, I am very excited to follow this trend over the coming year. And just a few more cool facts about vinyl's resurgence this year. And please forgive my horrible pun-titled slide. For Record Store Day, a huge and beloved celebration of custom vinyl created specifically for that one-day event. The event was actually delayed in 2020 due to the pandemic. It returned in the spring of this year, though, with an absolute bang. The first Record Store Day drop on June 12th was the third largest week of vinyl album sales in MRC Data's 30-year history of tracking the format. US record stores sold 1.279 million vinyl albums, with a record 942K albums sold from independent record stores. This is the largest week ever for vinyl sales within the indie retail sector, a fact that truly warms my heart, as it was an incredibly difficult year for me to see so many independent record stores. Many of my favorite local shops shut down last year. It was just devastating. Supporting your local retail providers is really such an important action to take. Please always consider when you purchase music, when going to buy a physical copy, instead of getting it from a large conglomerate like Walmart or Amazon, you can directly support a small business locally by giving them your business instead. Celebrations aside from these historic figures, let's not forget that the supply chain is severely backed up in production due to COVID-related setbacks in 2020. And manufacturers are still really rushing to catch up on that. It's become a quite common trend in the past year to release music digitally and follow up with the physical version anywhere from 4 to 6 months later. So I wanted to quickly talk about performance rights, and note that this data pertains to the year 2020 as opposed to the first half of 2021, like the rest of this presentation. Finding up-to-date stats on performance rights was a bit challenging, but I still found these figures interesting to share and relevant to today's topic. So traditionally, this had been an area that had seen a consistent global growth over the past 10 years. But due to limitations from the pandemic, every region across the world saw a decrease in revenue in 2020, except for North America, specifically United States and Canada. The US managed to grow their revenues by an astonishing 1.7%, with a dollar increase of 11.3 million. Again, though lower than prior years, this is still an incredible factor given the lack of performance right opportunities that came with the hardships of the pandemic. This increase in revenue was primarily driven by radio income, which increased by 1.9% due to robust performance of satellite radio services. So we anticipate that as TV, radio, and other public performance markets to begin to reopen this year, we'll be able to get back to that steady increase we've been seeing over the past few years. Though we do estimate it will take some time to rebound, and we probably won't be back to the growth rate of 2019 just yet until society begins to normalize a little bit more. Just a small fact that I found interesting that I wanted to share when researching for this presentation. According to Billboard and MRC data, music is continuing to maintain a leading role in weekly activities of active consumers. From a poll conducted earlier this year, 37% of consumers noted that they've increasingly been spending more time with music as an activity, when compared to other activities that we saw a spike in throughout the pandemic. So definitely reassuring news for all of us on the recorded side of the industry. So, all right, moving on to emerging trends in recorded music in 2021. These are just a couple of notable upticks we've seen, all pretty much resulting from the impacts of COVID-19, the isolations that it created, the very unique work and study situations we found ourselves in, and of course, the loss of in-person events and concerts. So a record number of Americans are still working or attending school remotely, which has resulted in a massive increase in the creation of chill and study-themed playlists to help aid in focus. New age music, a traditionally not too popularized genre, had an increase in consumption by 21.2% year to date. And classical music also saw a resurgence of 20.8% in comparison to last year. Surprisingly, both of these genres outpaced year-to-date increases for way more traditional popular forms of music, such as hip hop and rap, rock, dance and electronic, and country, with new age actually exceeding pop's year-to-date growth as well. A2IM has quite a few labels that focus specifically on these genres, like Chill Hop Records, The Nations, and Leaving Records. When looking at live streamed concerts over 2021, Bands in Town reported that 26,045 events had been listed on their site since the beginning of the year, with an average of 164 events each day. While still a healthy figure, this number is actually down nearly 28% from last year's averages. After the initial boom in March and April 2020, when artists and fans were really quite desperate for ways to connect with one another, we saw a slowly decreasing trend in live stream performances with consecutive dips in March, April, and May of this year. Although down from last year's numbers, we still saw an average of 129 new live streams announced per day in May of this year. So likely this is an indication that though concerts are slowly starting to return, live streams will continue to take up the space in the performance sector as a new revenue vertical, probably eventually transforming into some type of hybrid between in-person and virtual events. Lastly, everybody's favorite buzzword of the year, NFTs, non-fungible tokens, have also become a revenue stream for artists to distribute music and artwork. From February 25th to April 25th of this year, musicians made an estimated $55.7 million from NFT sales per Water Music Study, Sherry Hugh. I think there's still quite a bit of research to be done on just how effective and beneficial these types of sales are to smaller independent artists, but regardless, it's been quite an interesting trend to follow over the last 6 months, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who says they look forward to seeing how this pans out again over the coming year. So continuing on with trends, music catalog acquisitions have become a recently new and very popular move for more legacy artists with deep catalogs that span upwards of anywhere from 500 plus songs or more. We saw incredible high 9-figure deals laid out for masters and publishing rights from artists like Stevie Nicks, Paul Simon, and Bob Dylan. And the last trend we'll touch upon today is the incredibly fast-growing fitness tech sector. Fit tech was popularized during the pandemic when individuals were forced to find alternative methods to staying active when gyms and group classes shut down. Apps like Peloton and Headspace are leading the way in music licensing opportunities for songs that sync well with working out. Fit tech is primarily a US-focused phenomenon right now. There's bound to be room for expansion in the area as more and more services launch internationally, though. So that is a breakdown of all of the major revenue verticals for the US in 2021, as well as a look at some of the new and emerging trends we're seeing sprout up this year. While we may still be slightly limited with the data we have about independent contributions to the overall market share, specifically within the US, I did want to highlight the top performing independent record labels in 2020, according to IFPI's Global Music Report. I am very proud to say that nearly every label on this list is an A2IM member. So a special shout out to our beloved membership for absolutely killing it last year, despite the infinite amount of obstacles that were really thrown our way. And that is about it from me, folks. Quite a bit of data to throw at you guys over the last 15, 20 minutes, but I hope you found this presentation insightful and that you have a better understanding of the US marketplace should you be looking to expand your business here in 2021. Thank you again to the organizers of IMX, and I hope to catch you all in person sometime soon.